So for our final speaker series, we will be talking about unmasking the hidden crime, understanding the different forms of human trafficking. For those of you that may or may not have attended the prior speaker series, a little bit about me. I authored Florida's first anti-grooming bill and helped pass similar laws in multiple states. I testified before the U.S. Congress through the Committee on Homeland Security about child trafficking on November 19th, 2024. I am an internationally recognized expert on human trafficking. I've conducted on-the-ground human trafficking research across the U.S., in Central America, South America, with Dr. Sadolsky to gain a deeper understanding of trafficking. And I am the president of Guard Against Trafficking, a nonprofit co-funded to combat exploitation through research, education, and advocacy. For presentation overview, today we will be covering the definition and key concepts of human trafficking. We will be discussing the difference between trafficking and smuggling. We'll take a look from a global scope and look at some key statistics. We'll be diving into the forms of trafficking. And then lastly, we will discuss how to identify and respond. I have a very quick video. Can you guys hear? Can you guys hear the sound?
Yes,
Okay,
it's
perfect.
playing, yes.
Boys?
There are more slaves in the world today than during the transatlantic slave trade. A trade abolished in 1833, but far from eradicated in our society. Modern slavery is the commodification and exploitation of people for the purposes of making money. It is an illicit trade and a crime. Men, women, children, regardless of age, culture, education level, spiritual beliefs, are its victims. People's dreams, desires, and aspirations are taken advantage of, exploited, and used to create a vicious cycle of debt and fear. Modern slavery is real. It is happening in our communities. We interact with it, often unaware of the forms it takes or the criminality we are supporting, the choices we make on a daily basis.
I was forced to work long
Hours. Not get
paid. Things were not as promised. No passport.
hardly any English.
I felt
isolated, unsure.
my family, they were
Threatened. I am.
Scared. I knew this was
wrong, but
What else can I do?
I inserted this video because it was a really good visual depiction of the different forms of trafficking. It showed men and women. It showed various situations in which trafficking could occur. And it is way more powerful to hear it out of the voices of those that have been exploited and enslaved. The first thing we're going to cover today is human trafficking versus smuggling. These are commonly interwoven and misunderstood. The first one we're going to be covering is human trafficking. In human trafficking situations, there is always a circumstance of exploitation that exists, and no movement is required for trafficking to occur, no movement of an individual. For smuggling, there generally is a form of consent, and the smuggling ends after the destination is reached. Trafficking can happen within one country, even within a single community, and smuggled individuals can easily become trafficking victims if exploited after arrival. I included this graphic because it's really key to understand trafficking, and three components to which is key into understanding human trafficking is act, means, and purpose. Act is what is done, means how it is done, and purpose why it is done. Under act, typically the trafficker recruits, transports, transfers, harbors, or receives a person. The means, how it is done, they do this through threats, coercion, fraud, deception, abuse of power, preying on vulnerability, and abduction. There is an asterisk underneath that when a child is involved, someone under the age of 18, that the means element is not required for the situation to be considered trafficking, as consent changes when you're dealing with a minor. And purpose. Why is it done? With the intent of exploiting that person through prostitution of others, sexual exploitation, forced labor, slavery, servitude, or removal of organs. Here is a graphic that I included. It shows human trafficking by region. If you notice the blue, that's Asia Pacific. It is a $130.1 billion industry. In the Americas, it is a $109.1 billion industry. And then in the purple, it is a $107.1 billion industry. So when you take all of these numbers globally, you can understand how big of an issue this actually is. Another key point to understand is that it can happen to anyone, no matter what race, age, or gender the individual is. Anyone can be trafficked. And this is a common misconception when people focus on women or girls or children or a specific race or ethnicity or a specific age. It is important to understand that it can happen to anyone, any place, anytime. The types of human trafficking, the most common types are the 6 listed below: sex, labor, domestic servitude, child, organ, and forced criminality and military. And we will be covering each one of these in today's presentation. The global snapshot data, 49.6 million are involved in modern slavery today. 27.6 million are involved in forced labor, and 6.3 million are involved in sex exploitation. These are higher numbers than most people consider or think are involved when they consider human trafficking. The first form of trafficking that we're going to be covering, and the most, I guess, most commonly discussed form, is sex trafficking. The definition of sex trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act in which the act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or when the person induced to perform the act is under 18. The victims of this form of trafficking are primarily women and girls, but also include men, boys, and transgender individuals. Grooming is often done via social media or dating apps. We covered that in our prior speaker series covering grooming. Often the method to to lure someone in is the lover boy method, where a trafficker poses as a romantic interest. And this can swing both ways. It can be a lover boy or a lover girl, someone that is showing romantic interest. There are also circumstances of familial trafficking where parents and or relatives exploit children for drugs, money, or power. And oftentimes, if it's a generational trauma that has taken place, familial trafficking can occur because it is something that has happened in their family historically. And so that consistent trauma proceeds to occur. Coercion is often used through drug addiction, shame, or blackmail, such as sextortion. And then there's street-based prostitution. It often happens in street-based prostitution, massage parlors, illicit cantinas, strip clubs, and online ads like escort services. A story that I brought up for a survivor story, Jasmine, a 16-year-old runaway, met a man online who promised her love and stability. He slowly manipulated her into prostitution, claiming it was the only way they could survive, that they needed to pay for rent, they needed to pay for gas, they needed to pay for their expenses. She was trafficked across several states before a school counselor noticed signs of trauma and intervened. Jasmine is now receiving trauma therapy and speaks publicly to educate youth on grooming tactics. Sex trafficking data. According to Polaris, 72% are U.S. cases, 91% are women and girls, and 55% involve family, whether intermediate or extended family. The next form of trafficking is labor trafficking, where again, you are using force, fraud, or coercion to compel people to work. Victims are often promised good jobs, but instead face abusive conditions with no way out. Common industries involved in this practice are agriculture, construction, factories, restaurants, nail salons, and hotels. A few ways that traffickers are using to exploit migrant workers is by the H-2A or H-2B visa abuse. There also exists debt bondage, where victims are forced to repay a never-ending debt for travel and housing. There often is a withholding of pay or documents, such as a passport. There are threats of deportation or harm to their family. And victims often live and work in the same place. They may not speak the language and therefore lack access to transportation or outside communication.
It's called modern-day slavery, and experts say it's happening here in Hampton Roads. In fact, you may be witnessing forced labor and not know it. Investigative reporter Margaret Kavanaugh has been looking into this issue and joins us with more.
When you think of human trafficking, sex trafficking may come to mind, but there are other forms of this that may be right in front of you in restaurants, on farms, and construction sites.
But it's happening in so many places.
Forced labor happens when someone's compelled against their will to provide worker services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion.
The workers you see that are afraid to talk.
Like many others, Manuel Gago fled his home country of Venezuela 9 years ago to find a safer place to live.
It's sad, no? Because a lot of immigrants that came to this country came like, this American dream. And a lot of, like me, we escaping or nightmare in our country.
But he says for some, it's even worse when they get here. He works for the Legal Aid Justice Center, a group that provides legal services and help to low-income people. One of the places they go, the Eastern Shore. Many migrant workers, some could be isolated, being trafficked, and in need of help. He says poor living conditions, confiscation of passports and documentation, and little to no compensation are just a few problems seen across Virginia.
You can hear with all this promise when they hire you, amazing, and they never say you will be pay a lot of money. They say it will be a lot of work. So a lot of work means money, but when they can hear it's a lot of work and no money, and that's the problem.
Many believe that those involved in forced labor are here in the country illegally, but the National Institute of Justice found through a study that 71% are actually here on a working visa.
Do the stuff for the right thing, get in line, do your paperwork. These people do that. And when they came, and the situation is worse, because when they came, they take the passport, they take the visa, they say you need to pay me, I don't know, thousands of dollars so you can leave.
Experts say the top risk factors are recent migration or relocation, economic hardship, unstable housing, a criminal record, or a substance use concern. They say the people doing this own small and large companies.
Sometimes big employers say like, it's the contractor, it's not my fault, I try to collaborate, but they need to be more careful when they hire contractors to handle workers. No?
His group goes out to try to reach trafficked victims, working to get them help and make the public more aware that the food you eat, products and services you buy may come from someone being forced to work. Margaret Kavanaugh, News 3.
Labor trafficking can happen to American citizens.
I showed that video because, like I said, a lot of people, when they think of trafficking, they think of sex trafficking. And sex trafficking is a form of labor trafficking. They are put into a job to pay off a debt, and they are exploited to do so. However, labor trafficking is occurring far and wide in the United States, especially with the open border policy that happened in the prior administration. It severely increased labor trafficking in all its forms. So, aside from the visa abuse that was mentioned in that video, we do need to pay more attention to the labor trafficking component. While the humanitarian viewpoint would be, well, they're looking to send money, provide for themselves, provide for their families. A lot of times that additional consideration of, are they actually receiving the money they're making? Is someone controlling their money? Is someone controlling their documents? Is someone controlling their family? Is often overlooked and needs to be revisited through methods such as e-verify, making sure that the money goes to those that are working to make that money, so on and so forth. For labor trafficking data, it occurs at 24.9 million individuals globally. There are 16 million in private economy, and 92% in the US are foreign nationals where this is occurring. A survivor story from labor trafficking. Carlos, a man from Honduras, was promised a job in the United States and paid a recruitment fee. Upon arrival, he was forced to work 14-hour days in a tomato field, was never paid, and lived in a crowded, unsafe trailer. After suffering heat stroke, he was taken to the hospital, where a nurse connected him with a local NGO that helped him escape and file a T visa, also known as a trafficking visa. The next form of trafficking is domestic servitude. It is a form of labor trafficking, but often occurs in private homes, where victims are often isolated and controlled through emotional and physical abuse. Victims may be nannies, housekeepers, caregivers. They are often international women brought on false promises. Traffickers may be diplomats or wealthy families. Victims are usually seen as invisible because the abuse occurs in private residences, so it is harder to identify. It often includes no days off, little to no pay, and very restricted movement. It can also include confiscation of a passport, threats of arrest. Emotional manipulation includes phrases like, "You owe us," and "We saved you from poverty." Survivor story associated with domestic servitude. Maria, a young woman from the Philippines, was brought to the US as a domestic worker for a foreign diplomat. Her passport was taken. She was forced to work 18-hour days without pay and was not allowed to leave the house alone. Nearly after 2 years, a neighbor noticed her distress and called a local anti-trafficking hotline. Law enforcement intervened and Maria was placed in a safe house, later becoming an advocate for domestic worker rights. Domestic servitude data. There are 67 million at risk. 80% of them are women and many are migrants, and cases often involve diplomats. Child trafficking. Again, it's the recruitment, transportation, or harboring of children for the purpose of exploitation, including sex trafficking, labor trafficking, illegal adoption, and exploitation online. The key points to note are children cannot consent, so no force, fraud, or coercion is required to establish trafficking. High-risk environments where this often occurs, but it's not limited to, are foster care, group homes, runaway and homeless shelters. Family members are sometimes the traffickers. This surprises many individuals, but like we mentioned earlier, if there's a generational form of familial trafficking, it'll occur. Or when there is addiction in the household, a need to pay for drugs or alcohol or even household expenses, family members can resort to this type of trafficking. There is an increase in online exploitation and sextortion, which we covered in the last speaker series. And some children are groomed into producing CSAM material, child sexual abuse material. This was previously known as child pornography. However, it has been renamed to CSAM. Recruitment and exploitation for this often includes social media, gaming apps, online platforms, again, which was mentioned in the grooming speaker series and the sextortion speaker series. There is something known as sugar daddy traps, where there is promises of money, gifts, or fame. And in sextortion, predators pose as peers to get explicit images, then blackmailing. A survivor story for child trafficking. Trey, a 14-year-old boy from a broken home, was targeted by an older man who gave him gifts and attention. Trey was then forced into drug distribution and petty theft. After being arrested, a juvenile court advocate recognized signs of trafficking, and he is now in a foster home and participates in a youth mentorship program for survivors. Child trafficking data. 1 in 4 victims is a child. 19% of NCMEC of runaway reports child trafficking, and LGBTQ plus youth are 5 times more targeted. Organ trafficking. This is the illegal trade of human organs, typically kidneys, often involving coercion or deception. Victims may be lured under false pretenses of medical treatment. Organs are taken without consent or in exchange for false promises of money. It often occurs in countries with weak enforcement or corrupt medical systems. And the victims are often refugees, the poor, the prisoners, and especially the vulnerable. Organ trafficking data. 10,000 illegal transplants occur each year. The kidney is the most often trafficked organ, and there is often a delivery of false compensation promises. Just to take a look at the average cost of various organs on the market, the black market, if you obtain a kidney, you can incur or receive an average of $50,000 to $120,000 per kidney. Livers are worth $99,000 to $145,000. Hearts, $130,000 to $290,000. Lungs, $150,000 to $290,000. Pancreas, $110,000 to $140,000. Corneas, $5,000 to $100,000. Spinal cord, $150,000 to $300,000. And ova, $650 to $1,000. These prices vary depending on the donor's age, health, and physical condition, and often the country in which the organ comes from. There are countries where the organ is valued higher because those that are the organ is being obtained from is seen as a healthier country. Therefore, individuals are more willing to pay more for those organs. What's interesting about this component is in Dr. Sadulski and I's work, we do interview incarcerated traffickers. One of the incarcerated traffickers that we interviewed, his family was involved in organ harvesting and organ trafficking. When we asked how this often occurs, who are the victims, they defer to anyone in parks, homeless encampments. A lot of victims fell victim to organ harvesting on their journey from their originating country into the United States when the border was open. When we had asked how the organs are transported, his response was in coolers, like you would carry beer in. When we ask who does the extracting and where does this occur, it often occurs in what he had noted for his experience was Merida, Mexico. And when we asked why it occurred in Merida, Mexico, they said because they have the best surgeons. It often occurs in basements of hospitals and veterinary clinics. The veterinary clinics, we asked specifically about why a veterinary clinic, and it's because their regulations and inspections, their level is a lot lower than that of a hospital. When asked if the doctors are complicit, many are being threatened and forced into the extraction process for fear of their lives or fear of their families' lives. When asked if the hospital receiving the organ knows, that answer varied. Most of the hospitals, most of the doctors that are implanting organs aren't made aware of where the organ comes from, just that an organ has been obtained and is available. And when it comes to donor matching, that is something that is taken into account: tissue type, blood type, and again, where the organ is coming from, what is the race, ethnicity, country of origin of the individual in which the organ is being removed from. When asked about the disposal of body, the individual that we interviewed said that there had been too many bodies to count, and that they used to use, I forget what they used to use, but now they have switched to or they used to use acid. Now they use a accelerant and fuel because it burns hotter, so it disintegrates the bones. This is a occurrence that is happening not just in foreign countries, because the buyers are often US buyers. And there is a phenomenon known as uh, travel. I'll have to look up the term, but basically, where Americans are going to countries like Mexico because some of these services are cheaper and are able to be done faster. But the right questions aren't being asked on why are they able to be done faster? Why are these organs being able to be obtained quicker? And so these are some of the considerations that as we raise awareness on this issue, that people need to be made aware of. The last form that we'll be discussing is forced criminality and military. When trafficked individuals, especially children, are forced to commit crimes such as theft, drug trafficking, or fighting in armed conflict. Many consider this an issue that occurs in a foreign country, and that may relate as it pertains to fighting in an armed conflict. However, when it relates to theft, drug trafficking, and other forms of forced criminality, that does occur in the United States, in our own communities, both domestic and abroad. Victims may be arrested and charged as criminals, not recognized as trafficking victims. Children are often recruited as soldiers or carriers, so cartel mules. Their forced begging rings exploit children and the disabled, and they are often misclassified in the justice system. One of the things that is mentioned under this category is forced criminality as it relates to child marriage. For the statistics in the United States, the most recent statistic that I could get was between 2000 to 2008, 300,000 children were married in the United States. A survivor story: Grace, abducted at 12 by a rebel militia in the Congo, was forced to carry ammunition, serve as a child bride, and participate in violence. After escaping at 17, she found refuge with a UN partner agency and now speaks globally about the use of child soldiers. Forced criminality and military data: 300,000 plus child soldiers exist. They are used in crime and drugs and often misidentified, as we mentioned earlier. For a summary table, it outlines the different forms of trafficking that we discussed. It depicts the global victims, and it also shows the US trends as it relates to each type of sex trafficking, or each type of trafficking. So, for example, sex trafficking, there are 4.9 million victims globally, 72% of US cases. Labor trafficking, 24.9 million, 92% foreign nationals. So this was a very good way to depict overall some of the data and statistics that we discussed earlier in the presentation. Next, we want to go over the indicators of human trafficking. And there are 4 components that Dr. Sadolsky and I like to look at and examine when we're looking for indicators of human trafficking: physical, behavioral, and emotional, control and restriction indicators, and social and environmental indicators. The first one is physical indicators. You'll typically see unexplained bruises, cuts, burns, or signs of physical abuse. There often will be signs of malnutrition or exhaustion or dehydration. There could be repeated STIs or pregnancies. Sometimes there are branding and tattoos, names, numbers, barcodes, gang symbols. And then another indicator is inappropriate clothing for age or weather, sexualized outfits on minors. For behavioral and emotional indicators, victims will often avoid eye contact. They'll be overly submissive, anxious, or paranoid. They act fearful or nervous when answering questions. Their responses or stories often appear or sound rehearsed or are inconsistent. They'll appear numb, flat, or emotionally detached. There's usually a component of hypervigilance or PTSD like symptoms, jumpiness, fear of authority. There could be sudden personality or behavior changes. And sometimes there are appearances where they're confused about where they are or what day it is. Control and restriction indicators. They're not in control of their ID, money, or phone. Someone else speaks for them or watches them very closely. They're not allowed to leave work or living space freely. They're transported to and from locations by a third party. They may not know their address or where they're staying. And then sometimes they live and work in the same place, especially in illicit settings. The social and environmental indicators, isolated from family, friends, or community, frequently absent from school or work without explanation. There could be a sudden relationship with a much older boyfriend, girlfriend, boss, or friend. Staying in hotels with unrelated adults or couch hopping. Has multiple phones, new clothes or gifts with no clear source of income. The key points to remember are that victims don't often identify as victims or they don't know that they're victims. Trafficking can affect all ages, genders, and nationalities. And if you see something, say something. A lot of the indicators covered may or may not point directly to trafficking. They can point to a situation of abuse, whether it's physical, emotional, sexual, and it might not point to trafficking. But at the end of the day, it is our responsibility to report and allow law enforcement to do the investigation necessary to get to the bottom of what may be occurring. I've included the text and phone number for the human trafficking hotline. They are available 24/7. It is confidential and it is available in multiple languages. What can you do? With the information you know now, you can work to educate your community. You can donate to a nonprofit or vetted organization. You can join counter trafficking organizations. You can call your representatives and support counter trafficking legislation. And on behalf of myself, Dr. Sadolsky, and Guard Against Trafficking, we thank you.
Go.
Thank you, Allie, for sharing that information with us. If anyone has a question for Allie or something they'd like to talk about or a conversation they'd like to start surrounding this topic, please let me know. You can raise your hand or you can just pop on. I'll go first. The one thing that I'm just extremely shocked by is the numbers. The numbers are just a billion-dollar industry trafficking people, and then the number of people that are involved, all of the data, all of the numbers. And you get so overwhelmed. How do you, Allie, just for you and Jared and all of the people that are trying to fight the human trafficking system, how do you, what is a win? Because it's so much. There's so many people. So what do you consider a win when you're in this all the time? This is what you do as a living. Oh, you're on mute, hon.
Sorry. That's an excellent question. And it is about perspective, because there are times where it does get discouraging. There are times where circumstances don't turn out the way that we would like them to. But the first step is awareness. And the more we can understand about it, the more we acknowledge it, the more that we start noticing it in our own communities, that's a win for me. Is in the words of Jeremy, who we both discussed on Project Milk Carton, his famous phrase is reach one, teach one. And so we're hoping that we have that ripple effect, that the moment that we can start teaching individuals before something occurs, before pain, trauma, and these situations occur, that we can help in a preventative way. And then if it is occurring, once prevention is not able to be utilized, how can we intervene sooner? Because there are so many circumstances where we have heard from victims that say, we were in escort services in Vegas, in casinos, and people were none the wiser to us walking around looking for help.
Mm-hmm.
And so really it comes down to us being aware, us being alert. Dr. Sadowski and I went on a ride along with Shepherd's Watch 2 weeks ago, and we were actually venturing out in communities in Dallas, and we were looking at trafficking hotspots. And these were in good parts of the community, what you would deem as none the wiser, good parts of the community. And we ventured into illicit massage parlors, some of which were located right next to schools, one of which was located right next to a driver's ed education building. They were right next door. And when we went into these illicit massage parlors, we got firsthand experience and knowledge and understanding of how they operate, how they work. And on a few occasions, we saw Johns walk in for these services. And so we really need to start changing hearts and minds of people in the community, as well as making sure that we are aware of the Johns, Janes, and bad actors in our community that are spearheading and increasing the demand for these services.
Mm-hmm. Do you and your group, are you ever, I don't know if you speak to or you visit hospitals, major organizational healthcare systems, and educate them on what it looks like, what they might see, and what they need to do if they suspect?
Yeah, I mean, we have a business plan of communities, community members, different industries we would like to reach out and target, but really trafficking can hit any industry
Mm-hmm.
at any point. So yes, medical professionals are definitely needing to be aware. The ones that are mandatory reporters
Mm-hmm.
should be aware. But it's challenging when the signs of trafficking often present of signs of abuse. And so we need an overall cultural shift on how we approach signs of abuse.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. My thought around that was, just as a registered nurse and part of the medical community, is somebody gets hurt or somebody gets sick, that they're trafficking, and they bring them into the ER, and um,
And you get them alone.
you get them alone and try to see if they will ask for help or whatever it may be, and do the do our providers know the signs of that? Yeah.
It Some of them do. I will tell you a personal quick story. Dr. Sadolsky was reached out to by an individual at a clinic that was made aware that there was a trafficking victim that had walked in with her handler. They did separate them for the purposes of, the medical appointment. And when the victim was in the room, she did inform the doctor that she was being trafficked. And the follow through was the doctor handing her a human trafficking hotline card and saying, "Here you go."
Mm.
So that's where I'm saying there needs to be a cultural shift in understanding that as soon as that is been made aware, my my next move would have been calling the authorities.
Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely. Jeremy, I think Jeremy has his hand up.
So yeah, I'm sorry if my mic was on. I don't know what happened there. Um, so so yeah, as Ali was saying, what I always say, reach one, teach one. I think that is important to this topic is one, speaking on this and making as many aware as possible. And what I do, what Project Milk Carton does, is to educate and build tools out for parents and kids themselves, as well as people in this fight. One of the things that we're looking and working on doing now is to build out let's say for our kids, they all like to play video games. So we're building out these video games that are educational, and in that same aspect, for instance, let's say a fish game, where you're a fish, you're swimming, these questions are coming at you and you got to avoid them, or you attack the right answer, wrong answer, whatever it is. If a child is asked, for instance, grooming question, and they answered it incorrectly, on the back end, it'll give the parent or a doctor or a officer an indicator that this child answered this question, and it might allude to, it's possibly been groomed or trafficked or abused or whatnot in different case scenarios. So I think that's one way that we can utilize and build tools to be able to, I don't want to say probe, but probe without the child being harassed or felt like it's uh, being probed, because I think a lot of these kids come from trusted situations, or what they believe is trusted situations, um, that they won't necessarily open up to right off the bat, if that makes any sense. Um, so yeah,
No, that's a perfect example, Jeremy, because sometimes children don't feel comfortable discussing certain things with their parents, but if they're able to go through a simulation of a test where they're able to answer yes or no questions, or like how would they respond, then it allows the parents to understand, okay, here's a potential vulnerability that I may need to address with my child, much like you take tests in school to see how they rate in math, reading, science, to see if there are some gaps of understanding that need to be filled, or some areas of knowledge that need to be further fortified. So I think it's an excellent idea, and it's in a fun format for a child to start testing their skills, and parents to see if there are areas of vulnerability.
Absolutely.
yeah, and to add to that, so I thought that I was the lone um, person to come up with this ideal. Well, however, recently I've had in a situation with the social emotional learning that was implemented into our schools, kind of backdoored without our knowledge. So we're looking into that. I started getting their lessons plan sent to me every day and analyzing what the questions they're asking our kids is kind of the same aspect in that program. That's what they're doing. They all ask these kids, what they did over the weekend, how their day was, what they're feeling, what they felt about what their actions were, and so on. And on the back end, they're getting information about if the child's being abused or if something's taking place at home that they need to be aware of, or how that kid's emotions are, you know, with the way they're acting out and so on in school. So it's something that's already in place. It's just, you know, through this program, it just can be utilized in other ways, um, to find out what's taking place with these children. Because one of the things we see with Project Milk Carton is that a lot of these, kids that end up in these trafficking situations are coming from, broken homes, runaways from foster care systems and so on. And what I'm seeing is they're running to something or away from something. And when they go missing, and these officers locate them, they bring them back in, do their report, and take them back to the same situation, the foster care or whatever it is, right? Well, in between that, they can be like, okay, while we're doing paperwork here, play this game to keep yourself occupied, and then they can see what happened to that child, either why it left, where the child went, or what it was running to, or how it was groomed to leave the house,
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing, Jeremy. Appreciate that.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry I'm late
That's
again.
all right.
I think it's important to note some of the research that Jeremy does is also looking into. So we mentioned the increased vulnerability for LGBTQ plus children. It's important to note that vulnerability exists because there's confusion that exists on identity. So again, on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, those are harder to identify immediately. And when a child is struggling, then they start to look for confirmation and security and confidence in other ways, which make them more vulnerable and open them up in certain ways to predators that are willing to offer that boost of confidence and that friendship and that perceived um, acceptance. But the ending result is that perceived acceptance so as to exploit that child. Another thing that we're seeing is increased exploitation of those with disabilities. And so that is something we're looking very closely at because a lot of those men, women, and children either don't know what's going on, they don't know what is happening to them, they can't easily identify these grooming or manipulation or force, fraud, or coercion tactics. And so they're being preyed upon in those ways as well. And if that happens, it's harder for some of them to describe what is happening and why. So we are examining a variety of different perspectives as it comes into countering human trafficking.
Have you seen or do you think that there will be a time when this education specifically hits school systems where we're actually educating the children within the schools as part of the curriculum about what grooming is, what it looks like, what to do, who to tell? Jeremy's hand went up right away. Maybe he can
We
speak to that,
we
but I
are
really,
working on that. Florida just passed legislation to require at least one individual in each county to have a dedicated, human trafficking resource. Um, but it's such a delicate subject, how do you approach it in an age appropriate manner? How to handle uh, these certain conversations um, without overstepping a parent's rights. And so, I, personally, only speaking on behalf of my personal opinion, I would see it valuable as an opt-in program for parents to opt in their children into receiving education like that. But our more focus is educating parents on this, so that not only do they are they aware of the signs, but then they can teach their children and teach their grandchildren, because honestly, schools are inundated with what they have to teach our children. So parents need to start stepping in more and taking on these responsibilities that historically have been parental responsibilities. And then fill in the void with the ones that aren't receiving that training at home as, like I said, an opt-in option, whether it's through the school or the community. Um, that's kind of up to each community.
Sure. Jeremy, your hand is still up. Did you want to say something about that?
Yes, so I want to back up what Ali was just saying. I think the focus should start with the parents, because this is the thing that I've found. You know, uh, I've got 7 kids, but I got 3 small ones, and them coming up in this new age of gaming and everything's done online. Um, we are being this is being weaponized against our kids, and parents don't even know it. So first, I mean, we have to start with the kids, because what they play at home when we think they're in their safe space is actually grooming them. For instance, there's this fan fiction. Not sure if any of you are familiar with it. I wasn't that familiar with it until speaking um, with my child on one of the games he's playing. However, this fan fiction is, and it goes back to where um, Ali was talking about how there's communities out there that will accept your child, um, you know, if even if you know you don't agree with certain things, like the LGBT community. Um, and what I was speaking on earlier with the social emotional learning, my problem with that is they do override parent rights. They told my child that it was okay to be gay at 12 years old, that he should be accepted of any other child that's gay. Um, and that put into, you know, my child's head that even though he doesn't know what a sexual relationship or a relationship in itself with another person is at 12 years old, um, he said he was gay. So in that conversation, I'm like, okay, well, what do you know what that means? He's like, yeah, it's when a boy likes a boy. I'm like, you mean as a friend? He's like, yes. I said, well, do you know what a relationship entails? And he's like, well, we play games and we hang out and whatever. He doesn't know what it is in his head to be one way or the other, right? But there's these communities out there with this fan fiction who, um, you know, it's an imaginary world where they accept, you know, um, kids who say they're gay, and their parents, you know, push back on it or so on, and then they allow them to live this fantasy world out in this online realm, building out this whole life, right, making it okay. And there's a lot of parents that don't know, and this is a form, in my opinion, grooming, and this is massive. I mean, they're a non-for-profit that is all over the world, and all of these acceptance that works against the parents and whatnot. Then you've got in the school system, you know, where they're teaching the social emotional learning to these kids at a young age that are going against the parents' um, I can't, sorry, the proper word is escaping me, but
Guidance?
yes, their guidance, their moral values, their, you know, how they want to raise their child. And my issue with that is when I called the school on it, they said that they have rules and policies that override my parental guidance and morals. That to me is an issue. So when it comes to the school, those are the things that we need to focus on getting that out that are overriding the parents. And then in the same aspect, we need to make the parents aware that this is taking place and that these other entities out there in these gaming systems that are grooming our kids when we think they're in our safe dome, for lack of a better word, and forgive me because I've been told that I need to carry a feather and not a bat, and I think that I need to forget the feather and carry the bat. But um, we, you know, the white van is no longer at the curve.
Mhm.
it's sitting in our living room.
Mhm.
And when we come home from working and making dinner and doing homework and settle in, we think our kids are safe, and they're not. They're being groomed.
Mhm.
So hope all that made sense.